Hi, and welcome everyone to Whole Soul School and Foundation's Fireside Chats for September 2021. I'm Marie Mohler, and I'm an author, intuitive life coach, and a co-host of this Fireside Chats podcast series. I am here today with Lacy Frazer, my co-host, who is a clinical psychologist by training and a practicing life coach and consciousness educator today. I want to welcome all of our listeners today. Our mission here at Whole Soul School and Foundation is to increase self-awareness, personal empowerment, conscious communication, transformation, and freedom in people worldwide through our Good Vibes broadcasting and consciousness teachings. We hold a core belief that these conversations are an education, and we continue to envision and grow our mission of Good Vibes broadcasting by hosting and engaging with new voices, more messengers, more heroes in their own journeys, sharing the lessons, the gifts, skills, and wisdom that they have gleaned along the way. If you are inspired by our broadcasts and podcasts and wish to pay it forward, please, we invite you to make a donation through our website at wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org. You can also purchase t-shirts and apparel from our shop at bonfire.com. Look for the link for that below this video. So I thank you, and I just want to say we really appreciate big and small donations and one-time donations, as well as our long-term committed sustainers of the vision and our mission as well. We have so many good people believing in these positive messages about change and transformation, especially in these times. So please help us to make them more available to people seeking and needing them the most. And so I want to welcome everybody. I want to welcome you, Lacy, to our Fireside Chats conversation for September 2021.
Thanks, Marie. It's awesome to be here. As always, I can't believe it's September. That's crazy.
Right?
Moving into the fall.
Here we are. And in our Fireside Chats over the past many months, we've been spotlighting the stages of the hero's journey, going deeper into each one and bringing some of that energy, some of that consciousness, the essence of the stages to life so that people can see that coming to life in their own life journeys, their own life experiences. And we're hoping that these conversations help people in their own quest for self-awareness, discovery, empowerment, healing.
Yes.
And, when we're seeking something new, when expansion is calling, we are speaking to that expansion. So the next stage in the hero's journey for us to discuss further is, drum roll please, crossing the threshold.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Marie. It has been really, I'd love to speak mostly for people who are tuning in for the first time, that we here at Whole Soul School and Foundation have been talking about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And one of the biggest reasons we are diving into this deeply each month is because this really is the journey of us all, right? It's the journey of life. It's the adventures that life brings us as opportunities for growth and expansion. And I find his work and the hero's journey work one of the best sort of holistic ways of describing what it's like to walk through life. And one of the best ways to look at and expand our own awareness with respect to our steps through life. So it has been really, really awesome to be walking through these steps in a much more in-depth way. So for all of our listeners, I just want to do a little bit of a recap because I'm like the recap queen. I think it's very important to provide a summary of what we've done so far so that what we're going to talk about today makes sense, right? It puts it all into context. So what we're really talking about is we're talking about the journey of us all. And we have many sort of mini heroes journeys throughout our life. And these are really adventures, and these are changes in our lives. These are things that come up that we may want to step into and we may not. And so really the hero's journey begins, according to Joseph Campbell, with the first stage, which he calls the ordinary world. And this is really the world where we live, we've gotten used to, we sometimes get bored with, we sort of know that there are problems there, we're not sure how to solve them or how to move through them. And it's a world that is ours, but there comes a time or an incident or an experience that calls us to move in a different direction and possibly move out of that ordinary world. And that call, Joseph Campbell calls that the call to adventure, right? It's this next stage where we decide that something is pulling us maybe forward. It could be a new adventure of some kind, and we have an inclination to answer that call. And so I'm not going to go into each of these stages in depth. Please, if you're new to these podcasts, feel free to go back and listen to each of these stages because they're very important and they're very unique to each other, and then also each of our journey and our stages are very unique. So once we have the call to adventure, oftentimes we're kind of getting ready. We're thinking we're going to make a shift. We're ready to move, right?
It's kind of exciting.
Yeah,
feeling somewhat adventurous, and then some fears crop in, some doubt crops in, and we go through a stage Campbell calls the refusal of the call. And that is something we talked in depth about before. We've got to really kind of move through some of the ambivalence that rises inside of us about whether or not we actually want to move out of our ordinary world and move towards the adventure. And so who comes to help us when we move through the refusal of the call, we've processed those feelings, is the mentor, right? And so Campbell talks about the next stage after refusal of the call being meeting the mentor. And that can be a variety of different, that could be a person, an experience, could be a lot of different things, but the mentor is really meant to show our hero, our rising hero within, to give us skills, to give us knowledge, to give us wisdom, to give us strength and fortitude. And they believe that the hero is in there.
That's right.
Even when you don't, or you've just barely emerged, you're emerging, you're having these conversations, these doubts, all the voices that our ego wants to, speak to us through. We've got all these conversations going on in ourselves, and the mentor shows up in our lives as if to say, like, you've summoned in that mentor.
Right.
In some way, you've summoned in the mentor with your questionings and your doubts and your questing, all of that. And the mentor believes in that hero that is inside all of us, but it believes in it even when you don't.
Absolutely. And it believes beyond anything at that time. It believes in you beyond anything you could imagine. And it just knows beyond a shadow of a doubt.
It has a knowing because, and that mentor, which we said, and we're not going to go into these in depth, but we get excited about this. But that mentor may be somebody who's just one or two steps further in the journey than you are right now. And they've faced some of the things that are new to you, but they're a mastered skill for them. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're way down the road.
Not at all.
They can be somebody who's done this journey 1,000 times, and they may be somebody who's just done it one time, and gone around the story arc of the hero's journey.
And I think also the mentor is humbling and humbled by the fact that they have a knowing that their journey is just as continuous. You know what I mean? They're always learning. They're open to that. They don't have any kind of preconceived notion that they're so far ahead.
And they understand that this is what life is all about. It's a much more expanded lens on life. And they live through that lens. They look through that lens. They mentor through that lens.
Right.
And they invite you to see through that lens.
Yes.
Right.
And it's really, I love how you said about the belief, that it's really the belief in the hero in all of us that the mentor knows, because their own belief in themselves has been cultivated through their own journey.
Right.
And now they can believe for you, for the hero, until you believe it yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Beautiful. So we talked about meeting the mentor, and now we are at a really critical point in the journey, in the hero's journey, called crossing the threshold.
Dun, dun, dun. Right.
Crossing the threshold. And I want to open this sort of more in-depth discussion about crossing the threshold with actually a quote by Joseph Campbell, which really will set this up. Okay. And it says, "The familiar life horizon has been outgrown. The old concepts, ideals, and emotional patterns no longer fit. The time for the passing of a threshold is at hand." So really he's highlighting that when we actually meet our threshold and we're ready to take that very next step to cross the threshold, right? We are ready. We've met the mentor, we feel supported, we've gotten skills and knowledge and wisdom that we will need on our journey. We have moved through the refusal of the call. We have accepted that this is what we want to do, and we are going to answer our call to adventure.
And whether we know what that may look like or we don't, whether we don't have a picture of it at all, but we know we're on the path and we have outgrown our former life. We've outgrown maybe the boxes we were living in. There is a conviction that this is the path. Even the certainty comes in, the strength that's coming through is, this is mine to do. Right? Yes. There's an awareness that this is mine to do. This is my path to take. These are my next steps. Even if there's uncertainty and you're thinking inside, I don't know what this looks like.
Well, I don't know how this is going to go. Right? You're moving from the known to the unknown.
So the threshold, to even clarify further, at least in our podcast, I'm sure Joseph Campbell may have clarified this, but we haven't clarified this, is that it is a commitment to stepping into the unknown, even whether you know bigger pieces or small pieces or no pieces at all of how that journey is going to play out. You are leaving the known and the ordinary life that you've been living, and you are stepping into unfamiliar territory on a path you're not sure where it's leading, but yet you feel you must. You know it's yours.
So well said. And I would also almost characterize it as stepping into the mystery.
Stepping into the mystery.
And being comfortable with stepping into the mystery. You know, so many people they're not comfortable with the unknown. They're not comfortable with the mystery. In fact, I've worked with a lot of people who they want to stay right where they are, even if they are suffering and even if they're in pain, because it's too ominous, it's too scary, it's too overwhelming to think about moving into an unknown space, you know. But when the hero rises and the hero feels the call and the hero is ready, you know, at some level, this is the 5th stage, you know, so they're pretty ready at this point to take that next step. And we're gonna give some examples of what that looks like here in a minute. But I just want to reiterate that really, in order for our own hero to embark, you know, on any kind of epic journey, they've got to cross the threshold and leave their ordinary world, okay? Mm-hmm. And they are ready to act upon their call to adventure and begin the quest. And the quest could be physical, it could be spiritual, it could be emotional, right? And I'm just sort of reiterating what we said. And you know, the hero, aka us, we may feel like we're going willingly, or in some cases, we may feel like we're being pushed.
I was just going to say that because some people there's a future pull. There's something calling them to expansion, like somebody who has a creative gift, for instance, and they feel like there's a move that's imminent. So they're going to move their geographical location. They're going to step into a new life. And even that can be part of the mystery, right? This expansion that's happening.
Right.
But we can all relate to what I'm talking about, that there's something that feels exciting, anticipatory. You know the growth is calling you, and you're ready to step into it, even if you don't know what it means. But some people are being kicked out of their old life.
Yes.
Their old life is kicking them to the curb.
Right.
And they don't want to go.
Right.
And that is where there's some discomfort, and it's not exciting and anticipatory, and they're really trying to cling to their old life even when the door is shut and locked and closed. and more or less, and they know that they can't squeeze back into that old space.
So
right?
good, Marie. And that just goes back to Campbell's quote I just read, because he says,
yes,
the old concepts, ideals, and emotional patterns no longer fit. Right? And so many people stay in, it could be a job, it could be a marriage, it could be there's so many different things it could be.
It's a dynamic of some kind
yes.
that you have with something or someone.
Yes.
And those have an expiration date sometimes.
Yes.
And the hero's journey, and I would say, gotta say it, the soul presence inside people, right?
Right.
It craves expansion.
Yes.
And even if your human self is saying, why are we going anywhere? Why do you think we need to move? We don't need to.
This is safe. This is comfortable. Right. Why would I ever want to leave?
We don't need to be doing these things,
right?
right? We can just stay right here,
right,
where it's really comfortable
and safe,
and safe, and we don't have to go through this stress that is so unnecessary.
Right.
That's what the ego and that human self is saying in the conversation we often are having with ourselves, especially if we are being kicked out. And in the context of what's happened in our world over the we're coming up on almost 2 years now, right? With the pandemic globally, this is something that has kicked us out of our familiar patterns and pathways and the dynamics we have with things and with others. And so for many, many people, there's been a displacement. Right? It's been a displacement of their beliefs. It's been a displacement of them from their jobs. It's been a displacement of how they move, how they grocery shop, how they think about things, what their deeper beliefs are. All these things.
My God, Marie, we've been living on the threshold, or at least just crossed it as a humanity over the last year and a half.
Humanity has been crossing this threshold
wow.
because globally we're kicked out.
Right.
Globally, we've been kicked out
yeah.
of our former lives, pre-pandemic, pre this experience.
Yeah.
And so I would think that this podcast and this language of, and we always say, Joseph Campbell calls it the hero's journey, but we call it the rising hero within, right?
Right.
Which is the journey. And so acknowledging that we are all a bit displaced right now. Right. There are many examples of people who've been displaced, civilizations that have been displaced throughout history.
Right.
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 Whether it's from wars or whatever it might be. And here we are kind of with this experience with the COVID war and whatever this has been.
Right.
It's definitely, we can't squeeze ourselves back into our life pre-2020.
So true.
Right?
Wow.
We can't return to that old life. And some people, the language is return to normal.
Yeah.
But let's relate that to the context of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
The hero doesn't return to normal. I mean, what hero do you know returns back? Like, what is it? Is it Luke Skywalker? Is it Tatooine? Mm-hmm. After when he becomes this Jedi and he's just beginning to be trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi, he can't really return to the life he was living as kind of he wasn't a farm boy. Was he a farm boy? I'm not sure who he was. But whatever he was, he doesn't ever...
You're thinking of Princess Bride.
They're all sort of swimming together now.
Right.
But you don't return.
Right.
You continue forward in the growth. But there is this language that...
Can I just interrupt 1 second there? Because I just want to clarify. They do return. Our heroes do return. They may return to Tatooine, or they may return, to in the Princess Bride or Nemo or whatever adventure we're talking about. They do return. And the return is a critical piece to the hero's journey, which we'll talk about in a few months.
Yes.
But they are changed.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
They are not the same person.
They can't not know what they now know.
Yes.
And that's part of the threshold.
Right.
Right? So they truly have some kind of growth experience that expands their horizon, that expands their vision, that expands their vision for their horizon, for their life. That's what can't squeeze back into the same person
right.
that they were before they knew something new.
Right. Right. And even if they try to think the way they used to think or feel the way they used to feel or respond to people in the same emotional pattern.
But at some level, suffering is the result. I'm not saying that people don't do it. That's also important. So they don't try to do it.
Yeah.
Some people work really hard to squeeze back into those old lives and these old outfits and things. But they're too small.
Right.
They're never going to fit quite right.
Right.
Because you know too much. You know there's something more.
Yes.
And you can't turn away from that something more.
Yes. Yes. Well said.
And when you do try to turn away from it, there's pain on some level.
Yeah.
Some level, which is what you talked about. It could be emotional pain. It could be physical pain. It could be some kind of...
Yeah.
It shows up. That is your body and your higher awareness getting your attention through your physicality.
Right.
Through your suffering.
Yes.
Through your physical experience as a human being. That's its way of tapping you on the shoulder. Like you were supposed to turn to the right, but you went to the left. So if you're not going to listen to me otherwise, now you're sweating.
Or now
you're
you have
stressed.
back pain.
Now you can't sleep. Right? Now you can't reconcile things. You just feel kind of jittery, anxious. This is your higher self speaking. This is your higher consciousness. There's something in a movie that said, this is your captain speaking. Getting your attention that we must take this journey. And I am with you is also the mentor can be within.
Yes.
Which we don't talk about that. There is a higher self guiding things. For a lot of people beginning this journey, it's not their language. It helps to have that external mentor. But there is an internal mentor within for those that can listen to that as well.
Yes.
So I won't go too far off track, Lacy.
You're right on track.
Okay.
That was beautiful, and that's exactly right. But let's return to the threshold itself, which is this point where the hero is really ready to commit to the journey.
Yes.
Whatever may be in store for that person and that adventure, right? And we just to highlight again the unknown, the mystery that they're stepping into. And there's a great quote we're going to bring in later, but really kind of gets at the essence of it's better. The hero has an awareness that moving forward must happen, and because the pain of not moving forward.
Correct. It actually begins to feel better to go into this life that is yet unknown than it is to stay in the pain of what is known.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Hallelujah.
Yes.
All right. All right.
And, we speak about this so in many ways clearly because we've done it.
Yes.
We've been around this
many times.
Many times.
Yeah. And we want to talk about a few examples, but I want to bring up a couple examples of the threshold, and then I'd love you to bring in the story of some of our friends recently who are on the journey, and their story is just remarkable. So I'm excited for you to talk about that. But
me too.
I just want to bring in two sort of very salient examples that many of our listeners will know about when it comes to the threshold. And the first is Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And I don't know if you remember this, Marie, but I so clearly remember, having seen the movie 650 times, that there is a scene after she's landed the house on the Wicked Witch of the East. She knows she's not in Kansas anymore. She has left the ordinary world, right? And she's surrounded by munchkins, right? And then who comes into the scene but Glenda, the Good Witch of the West, and she sort of is this mentor figure who gives Dorothy a lot of sort of wisdom and answers Dorothy's questions and says, okay, so this is what's going to happen now. This is where you need to go. And what she says is, follow the yellow brick road, right? Just follow the yellow brick road. And there's the camera. I don't know why. I just really always remember this. The camera zooms in very calculatedly on Dorothy in those ruby slippers, which, by the way, her mentor gave her, right?
Yes,
that's
true.
part of that.
To do the walking.
To do the walking, and that is the role. Glenda cannot walk for her, but Glenda can give her the shoes that will help her.
Wow.
And the camera zones in on those ruby slippers and Dorothy taking her very first step on the yellow brick road.
Wow.
And then she takes one step after the other and she's on her way. And at that point she knows at that point when she takes that step, she's going. She's going. Whatever faces her, she's going.
She's going to meet it.
Right? And that's a great kind of concrete example of that.
Fantastic.
And then there's another example. We use this example, the Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien is used a lot when it comes to the hero's journey,
It's pretty
right?
classic.
Pretty classic. But, Frodo is given the ring, right? And instruction from Gandalf, who is his mentor. And also his mentor gives him a magical sword and chainmail, just like Glenda gave Dorothy the shoes. And Frodo sets off with his friend Samwise Gamgee, right? And they're on their way on their adventure. And after they've traveled for a little while, there comes a point when Samwise stops. And I don't know if you remember this in the movie. And he says, quote, "This is it. If I take one more step, this will be the farthest away from home I've ever been," right? And there's great trepidation within Sam at this point, and he hesitates and he marks the moment when he crosses the threshold into what is truly unknown. Mm-hmm. So his next step, that step that's the farthest away I've ever been, I have chills.
Crossing of the threshold.
Right, really into the unknown. And I think Sam really understands at that point that he's at the point of no return, right?
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. And if he commits to the adventure, there's no avoiding or escaping what's to come, and he's ready to face that. So
powerful.
So powerful. So I love those two examples in Dorothy and Frodo. And I just think those are great illustrations that many people can relate to, right?
Absolutely. Well, they're beautiful examples, right?
Yeah.
So clear. It makes the journey so clear for people who are knowing that in some way they're living this too, but looking for those examples to mirror to them. We are the Dorothys,
right?
We are the Sams, we
right.
are
Frodos.
The Frodos. These characters. So I wanted to bring in another quote that is from Gary Zukav about crossing the threshold. This so energy, good. Right? There comes a time when the pain of continuing exceeds the pain of stopping. At that moment, a threshold is crossed. What seemed unthinkable becomes thinkable. Slowly, the realization emerges that the choice to continue what you have been doing is the choice to live in discomfort. And the choice to stop what you have been doing is the choice to breathe deeply and freely again. Once that realization has emerged, you can either honor it or ignore it, but you cannot forget it. What has become known cannot become unknown again.
So powerful.
It's so powerful. And it's a common language. It has to be rediscovered, but it is a language, I believe, Lacy, that we all have this inside because we all know this hero's journey that we're all here to take. It's deep in the human psyche. It really is deep in the fabric of humanity. And, through stories and through the movies over the last 100+ years, it's come alive. But then sometimes, and we've talked about this before, sometimes those characters on the screen, we think, well, it's just for them. Right. Or it's just the superhero that's really a fantasy character, right? Or a science fiction character, something that is not real people. It's something out of Hollywood that doesn't really happen. That's the mistake. The mistake is thinking that it's just a character in a storybook. The truth is there are real living heroes in all of us. And I think we can all relate to an experience, a time when the pain of staying where we were does become greater than stepping over the threshold and putting that first step like Dorothy with the red shoe in the yellow brick road, and she's on her way. There is that moment that does happen. It's an energetic experience. It's a conscious decision for some, and some it's just an energetic progression. It's just they know that they've crossed over, whether it's a physical line in the sand or whether it's an invisible energetic one, but that moment, and you usually know you've passed it, you've crossed it once you're on the other side of it. right?
Yeah.
That's when it really becomes clear.
Yes.
Especially for the new hero in their own journey, becoming conscious of this world and this language and this journey that is theirs to take.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that helps because that's something else that I've learned a language to myself. Often I don't know I was in something or growing through something until I'm more on the other side of it, or at least I've stepped through it and I look at myself and say, hey, you're here.
Yeah. Yes.
You are on the path, girl. You are here. And then you continue forward and you know that the door to the old life, you already know it if you would really be honest and admit it inside. That door inside is closed. That old job, your old, colleagues, the way you moved in your life, somehow that is over. And there is something new that's inviting you, pulling you forward now more than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, I love the energy of how you describe that. And I'm sure every one of our listeners can resonate with some experience in their life, where
Like
they've
that.
said, I work with a lot of people over the last 30 years, and just so many people have said to me, this can't be all there is.
Right.
This can't be all there is. And I say, well, let's vision what else there could be, just to get them talking about that. And you hear kind of that cluck, clunk, cluck, clunk in the thought process of, wow, I've not thought outside this box of my ordinary world before.
Even this can't be all there is sometimes can be a companion, not a mentor, but a companion in the journey that keeps you where you are.
Yes.
Because sometimes people thinking that question or that thought can't tell if it's a question or a thought. This can't be all there is. I don't know if it's a statement or a question.
I think it can be all of the above, depending on the situation.
Who the person is and the situation.
Yeah.
But sometimes saying it is a way of releasing some of the pressure that they are being summoned to something else. But by acknowledging some inkling of a belief that this can't be all there is,
right,
then they don't have to step into something else that's unknown. They'll stay with what this is.
Well, and hopefully they say that to a mentor who then says, "Oh, baby,
you're going.
There's a lot more." And let me help give you a glimpse of what that could be.
Right.
Whether that's a coach or a therapist or a whatever.
A friend, exactly.
A friend,
somebody
spouse.
who's, been in the journey.
Yes.
Or somebody in a podcast. We are mentoring lots of heroes in the journey for those who are listening. And those who are listening, we thank you. And we continue to walk with us because we're going to continue this conversation about this for a long time.
Yes.
Because there's so many ways that this expresses through so many different people. And we're all here to empower each other.
Yes.
So speaking of that, can I bring in
please
some of my friends? Their names are Joanna and Lee. And I'm going to send them a link to this podcast that they don't know is going on right now. But you and I are in this conversation. I just talked to them this week. We're going to be sharing a podcast very soon where they do share some of their hero's journey. They're living it right now,
live,
in the moment,
yes,
live in 2021. Talk about, I wish we had the GoPro camera or something where we could support them to illustrate the journey that they're living right now. But let me invite our listeners here in this conversation into some of the details about what they've been living and how they crossed the threshold. And all this has happened. It accelerated, it kind of quickened over the last 3 to 6 months for them. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is Joanna.
Such a great story.
Such a great story. Joanna and Lee. And they were, in their own ways, maybe unbeknownst to them, but at some level also knowing that they were both feeling that kind of squeeze, that they were meant to be doing something
Well, they were
else.
living in their own separate ordinary worlds. They didn't know each other.
They didn't know each other. This is probably, let's go back 6 or 7 months ago, something about that time frame. And this is September 2021.
Right.
So early in 2021, they did not know each other, but they were in their journeys nonetheless. Right? And they're living their lives. Both are having this inkling of the call to something more. I'll let people hear it in the podcast because, of course, they tell it the best in their own words because I've just recently talked with them about this and I'm going to be sharing this. It's called the Global Spotlight Podcast and we'll be sharing that soon. But, Joanna in her life had traveled some. She worked as an accountant and she worked a straight 8 to 5, 9 to 5 job, maybe even some, if she was called.
Linear life in a box.
Very linear life and a lot of parameters of
Cubicle.
deadlines and those things. And she knew that. And she was always called to travel, right? But then, of course, this is, I don't know if it's the refusal of the call, might be some energies in there. There's always these things. Well, I need to make some more money and then I'll go. There's all these reasons why you can't go now.
Oh, there's a pandemic.
There's a pandemic, but there's many. There's even before what's happened with the pandemic, there still were these messages. She's always had this calling, right? But she's listening to that, so she's, feeling called forward, but then, then you settle back in your life and you're not quite sure of the how, H-O-W, that's the big $1 million question for a lot of these things in the journey. How is this going to happen? So that's kind of her, that paints a little bit of a picture of Joanna.
Her ordinary world.
Her ordinary world. Right? And then you have Lee over here who tells his story, but I'm going to paraphrase it just a little bit, that for at least 10 years in his life, he was feeling this call to adventure. He had an awareness about his ordinary world. He interviewed a lot of people in his life and would hear stories from people who thought about doing things but never did them.
Right.
Stories from people who actually did do some of the things that they wanted to do, and then he would ask them more questions. Clearly, somebody who was embracing with anticipation and a bit of eagerness and wanting, desiring this experience. And he off and on, through a period of time, was going to test out the hero's journey, the call to adventure in some ways. And he did take a series of trips for 2 or 3 months at a time. That's what I remember him saying. And he would test this out. And then he would return, though. He would return to the ordinary world with the thought, the belief system that I'll get a job, I'll work a little bit, I'll put away money so that I can go longer or so I can do more of this other life that is really calling me forward. It's more of who I am.
And then, I think, it's also probably important when I think about Lee and Joanna living in their ordinary worlds. They were single.
Yes.
Not a lot of family.
No, they have family, but they're living kind of, again, this part of the story, I'll keep going.
Okay.
That they don't know each other, but in a way, we're kind of living parallel heroes' journeys, not knowing each other all this time. And I don't want to retell the whole story that's going to be in the podcast, but I can tell you 10 years is a long time to be doing what Lee was doing, feeling the call. And he was involved in a lot of things. When he would be called to try an experience, he didn't say, no, I'll wait till later. So if there was like skydiving or surfboarding or definitely living that kind of adventurous type spirit, he was engaged. He was like, I'm on it. I'm doing it. But in terms of leaving the belief system somewhere, there was like, I need to earn this money so I can go. I need to do all these things that we set up for ourselves.
Right.
He said he is still, I could feel it, he's still surprised. 10 years went by.
Yeah.
10 years went by in his life where he wasn't doing what he wanted to do. So fast forward to sometime, certainly in 2020, but very early in 2021, this year, he's now having this experience more and more. There's this mounting feeling of like, you've got to go. You have this thing to do. I'm just going to do it. So and I think at some point he might have gotten in UK language, because they're both, they met in the UK, was redundancy. So I think he was let go from his job at some point during COVID. So he has this time to be able to be more invested in what's calling him. And Lee's story, he'll share it himself, but had always wanted to bike when he traveled, like be this free spirit where he had his own transportation and he could go where he wanted to go. Not just be on the typical buses that tourists take that take you to tourist towns. Like he wanted to live in different cultures and really experience them literally on the hero's journey, him on his bike.
Right. Wow.
Creating the path as he goes, not on any other previously, scripted for him. He was off grid. He was like,
Right.
So that's Lee's story. And one day when he's listening for his guidance and whatever it was that was going to lead him forward in his path, he goes out on a really nice day, kind of wakes up and says, it's a really nice day today. And he goes to a place that he doesn't always go to but he set out his sketch pad and was just in maybe journaling. I'm not exactly quite sure, but he was out in nature and he was open to the experience and feeling, this new life in some way that's calling him.
Yeah.
And he just goes out for the afternoon, but feels like today's a good day.
Right.
Well, Joanna, parallel to him, also wakes up amazingly and has this feeling of today's a good day. I'm going to go out for a walk. Right? And on this day, and she'll tell the story in this podcast, but she goes out for her own adventure. And on this particular day, she's nudged to go further in her walk, like walk a longer distance than she normally does. And she didn't ignore it. She listened. So she kept going, she kept walking, and it lands her into the space, I think, where there's tables and maybe
like
people
a park
outside.
Or something, yeah.
Right? And she's talking to a couple people gathered there. And then she notices this guy who's there with these sketch pads, and he just seems really comfortable with who he is, isn't really seem to be worried about time, just very present, probably.
She can feel his energy, probably.
She can sense that.
Yeah.
And they strike up a conversation.
Wow.
Right? And they talk for, I don't know, a couple of hours or something. And in that conversation, there was a connection. And I think numbers, were exchanged, obviously. And they continued the conversation. And in the next, times that they were together, they shared. Joanna always wanted to travel. He always wanted to travel. He was a little bit more of an experienced traveler in some of the things he'd stepped into. He had this vision of traveling by bike. She had this vision of traveling on airplanes and buses
and hotels. And, right, comfort.
And a little bit of a different vision. But there's this intersection in this hero's journey. And so there's lots of details, which I'm sure they're going to be telling their story. They are truly a living example of the hero's journey right now. So they meet in a month and a half's time. They know that there's this window because of all the COVID restrictions and things. There's a small window where it'll be easier to leave the country, that they can go somewhere else if they are going to travel. There's this small window. So things get accelerated, and all of a sudden there's this crossing the threshold moment where they say to each other, they're going to do it.
Let's go.
They're going to do it. And bikes are part of the equation, Joanna. So brave. So brave. And Lee is amazing because he's like, I'll teach you. I'll help you. Right. I know about some of these things. They're kind of mentoring each other in these different ways, actually. And so then there's another 6 weeks of planning. They have to literally sell a lot of the things that they had. She had to close out of an apartment she was renting, put things in storage. It's quite a phenomenal story. It's got magical elements in all of it.
Absolutely.
And from the time they met to the time they left, I think it's about 3 months.
Wow.
And they leave the UK and they fly to Costa Rica.
With their bikes.
And a couple carry-ons.
Oh my gosh.
And see what they're carrying on, which I don't even think we talked about, but I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. It had to be what they packed. They had to be willing to carry on their backs. So everything that they packed is everything that they would be carrying from that moment forward. They're not going to a B&B. They're not going to a hostel. They're not going to a host family. No. It's literally the bags they have and their bikes, and they had to buy these very expensive bikes. That's another. These are crossing the threshold kind of decisions where you're in the journey. When you bring out your credit card or you basically sign on the dotted line to buy these specialized bikes that can ride, I guess, in all terrain. I'm not sure all the details about it, but anybody can imagine. This is a very different kind of bike than my little beach cruiser that I have. It's one speed. Okay.
But what you're saying is they had to have everything that they packed had to be on their back or in saddlebags, probably on their bike. And talk about committing. I mean, there was just a level.
And see, you can hear in this story that I've already just said, there's an ordinary world that had been playing on for some time.
For years.
Then there's the call to adventure. They'd both already been through that.
Right.
They already knew the call to adventure. It was just how were they going to answer it?
Right.
Then there's the meeting the mentor.
Well, they probably had the refusal of the call, which was probably, you talked about that with Joanna, like, I don't know how, I can't do that. And that's when we set up our limitations of why this won't work.
Right. Whether we get into mortgages, I have this, I got that, I can't do this at this time, I'm supposed to be doing X, but I'm attracted to Y, whatever that is.
Right.
Right. All these stages, and they'd been around those wheelhouses enough to be ultimately at this precipice where their souls could meet, right? They were called into this intersection, that I would call it. And from there, though, they still had to keep stepping into the journey, admitting their authentic future pull that they both had. And for something to happen that quickly, there's already been some pre-work done, right? Because
subconsciously
they were ready to meet it at some level,
right.
Which is why I think, in 4 to 6 weeks, they're getting to know each other. In another 4 to 6 weeks, they're planning this whole life adventure. And then they leave. I think it was sometime in June. They left. They flew out. That's it. In this little window of time that it worked out. And they are now in Costa Rica, and they are literally living the hero's journey, trusting everything from each night. Where will they sleep? They're not sure. Each night, where will their meals come from? Right. They're listening for what that guidance is going to be as well.
Gosh.
And they are just, to me, I get so excited.
Oh my God. And I have to throw in a little envy there. I mean, it's not a great emotion, but I have so many thoughts and fantasies about my own adventures that I want to take in the future,
Well, but the future now, it's like you're seeding it now.
Yes.
And that is your future, but that's exactly what they did. And how many of us listening to this podcast listen to Joanna and Lee and say, like you said, either with envy or like, oh, I'm doing the work so that in whatever version of that is for me, right? It may not be Costa Rica, maybe not on a bike.
Might be a sailboat.
Might be a sailboat, correct. Could be something else, right? A new job, a new vocation, a new
retirement,
people, a new part of the world.
Right.
It could be anything.
Right.
It doesn't have to be but we are all illustrators of the very same hero's journey. We just express it differently. And there's much more to their story. We've just scratched the surface, but I hope to have more of, kind of where are Joanna and Lee now in our podcast. And they're sending me pictures. We're going to keep podcasting. And it's not with pristine perfection in terms of that there aren't moments of this is hard. Right. That there aren't moments of, well, what do we do with this situation, right? Or how's this going to play out? Or what if I don't get the income I need? How long can I sustain this? Whatever, this new life, and all the ego's doubts want to come in. And yet they are doing it. They are doing it. They literally are doing it. People are letting them, they're knocking on doors and they're connecting with people who are letting them stay on their property. And they are finding a way because they're listening to the path, that yellow brick road.
Yes.
The bikes are the red shoes for them.
Yes.
The bikes are their passage, right? But the commitment to buy the bikes, to me, I don't know that I asked them that question. I will have to ask them in the next time I talk to them. At what moment can you look back and say is when you cross the threshold? Like, was there a defining moment, when they had that experience? To me, I would imagine buying that level of bike was probably like buying a car for the journey. It's a big decision.
Right.
So, but I'll have to ask them that. So yes, they are incredible illustrations. And of course we want to, engage them and talk with them. And we want to be empowering them and celebrating them in the hero's journey through the ups and the downs.
That's right.
That the unknown and the mystery and the mystical takes you into.
Yes. Right? And we have to interview them on the return. Right.
Oh, it's going to be hopefully a continuous conversation as long as they have Wi-Fi.
Right.
And as long as we can connect, and we are being creative about Wi-Fi. Sometimes they kind of are letting me know we'll be here and we think we'll have Wi-Fi.
Right.
So we're kind of catching each other as we can.
Right.
And that's also part of the hero's journey. It's so lived in the moment that I'm living it just in that way. So it had to be shared in this conversation.
Of course.
And I didn't plan this timing that we were going to be crossing the threshold in these conversations.
Right.
And that Joanna and Lee would all of a sudden be available to podcast in exactly this month. But that's how the universe works. It conspires to give us this magic so more people make the connection.
Yes. Wow, Marie, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm like swimming in just their journey and my own and ours and just all the possibilities. When you get into the energy of possibilities, you and I have gotten so used to the mystery, so used to the unknown, that I think that we embrace it. We love it. We want it. And
if we can make it friendly for the people where it's a first time, where it's kind of scary.
Yes.
Because we look at it now, we love the thrill of taking the leap, in this way.
Right.
Because we understand what the journey is. But for people who are listening and say, that sounds like a lot of fun for those people, but it's not for everybody. Not everybody goes through that journey.
Right.
And I want to say, no, it is for everybody. Even the person who believes if they feel like they have a small life, that they're meant for the small life, even that person, there's something more. There's something more for all of us.
Right. And I think, when you tell the story of Joanna and Lee, or some of these bigger, we're telling some pretty big expanded stories to illustrate the point, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, we've already talked about the hero's journey, and crossing the threshold it could be a decision for a new job, right? It could be a decision to retire. It could be, a child moving out of the house for the first time to go to college or to a new town. There's sort of
the adventure of parenting.
Yeah, the adventure of parenting.
There's just so many things, so many ways that it plays out. But we would invite our listeners to be listening.
Yeah, yes.
Right? That's why listening to podcasts, it kind of trains your ear to be listening for what is for you. We all know there's music and podcasts and shows and broadcasts and all kinds of things. And we know there are things for us and there are things that aren't for us. But if you are a podcast listener, you're somebody who tunes into shows like this and looks for inspiration, you're already a little bit more attuned than the average bear. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that you're also cultivating. Look at Joanna and Lee. Now they may come into our Fireside Chats more and more.
Right.
But as an example, they have to be listening. Where are we going to stay the night? What's our next couple days look like, right? Where are we going? What do you think we're going to have for dinner or lunch or breakfast? And how's that going to go? And what do we want to be experiencing? And how do we want to feel? And, oh, look, it looks like it's going to be thunderstorming and it's the rainy season, and now it's going to rain for 5 days. Well, okay, so how do we want to move in this? It's a moment-to-moment decision-making that for them, that's something they needed, wanted, desired, and craved.
And had been thinking about it for a long time. And oftentimes that's when it
happens.
Yeah.
And yet I just want to bring this in and then we'll close out this part of the conversation with the Joanna and Lee illustration. And I want to thank Joanna and Lee again for sharing their story with us.
Absolutely.
But there's an adjustment because a lot of what they're doing right now, even though Joanna wanted to travel, this was not the version of traveling that she anticipated.
Right.
So where Lee had been rehearsing and practicing and listening to this future pull.
Right.
She's still getting adjusted to this experience.
Right.
And that could be true of any of us. We might have a vision. Lacey, you mentioned a sailboat, but maybe instead it's a
camel.
I mean, it could be.
Right?
It just could be.
I don't think so, but it could be. I'm open.
We have to stay open. We have to listen. And we are also summoned in this journey to have a kind of adaptability, a flexibility that, we will learn. And if biking doesn't work, I'm sure we'll hear more about that. I don't see that in the future.
Well, and it's so fascinating too to me, and it's just kind of another side angle to this conversation, is the fact that these two people did not know each other 8 months ago.
They said that this week, about 6 months ago.
Oh my gosh. So 6 months ago.
So they've been 3 months in Costa Rica now, just about.
Wow.
And
so they had known each other 3 months before they crossed that threshold.
100% kind of mentoring each other.
Right. Gosh, how
in
beautiful.
the journey, which is really powerful.
Yeah.
And then having people, the way they're doing it, have people in their own ways mentor them in the journey, mentor hospitality, mentor generosity, mentor what exchange, equal energy exchange means. I mean, there's so many things. I'm sure we're going to be talking about that because they have so many things to share.
Yeah.
And I really hope our listeners tune in. And I've also invited people who hear about this in this podcast and see the Global Spotlight podcast with Joanna and Lee. I would invite you to consider making a donation to support in some way journeys like theirs, journeys like others are taking.
It would be neat to be able to have a fund
for people.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that we can be doing, right? We see that in people's conversations.
Yes.
So if people want to donate, maybe they can put in the memo if they want to say to something. We are still learning about how to have different fund streams for different things.
Yeah.
Right now we have one big general fund, but you could always email us, and then if enough people are doing that, we'll create another fund to support the heroes taking the hero's journey.
Yes, I love that.
So
that is a spontaneous thing right now in this moment.
Right
love
there.
It.
Right
love
there.
It.
That's what the heroes do. This energy does.
Yes, it does.
Creates amazing things.
Yes.
So okay. So what else? Do we need to talk about some more things?
No,
I
think we have. I think we've done a great job at just talking about and getting into the energy of the threshold. And the threshold can be, one small moment in time. And once we step like Sam across, or once Dorothy put her foot on the yellow brick road for the first time, and these were very defining moments. This was the no turning back moment. And so I think that, and clearly with Joanna and Lee, they had that at some point where they said, wow, we're doing this, right? We're doing
all
this.
in.
We're all in, and the adventure awaits. So I'm really excited also about next month, because we'll be talking about the next phase, which is tests. I think it's tests, allies, and enemies. And so basically, think flying monkeys and wicked witches, right?
Right.
So, and what those things teach us.
Well, and they summon these bigger skills that we don't even know at that point in the journey that we even have them yet.
That's
but
right.
We are going to find them.
That's right.
They're going to emerge.
Right.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you, Lacy, for joining me today. It's always so fun to go on take these rides with you, because even though we are sitting here in a room with a microphone in between us, right?
Right.
What's amazing is we just journeyed all the way to Costa Rica and back, and and all these other dimensions of consciousness and back.
Right.
And that's what I want to also invite people. They're like, well, I can't really go anywhere. I don't have the funds. I don't have the resources. This is what books do. For centuries, people would read books to take an adventure.
Right.
Right. So we invite you into the adventure with us.
Yes.
We're going to keep seeding all kinds of adventures, and I want to spotlight that as well. We have more voices, more podcasts planned for this month.
Our website's getting redesigned.
We're in a process with that. There's going to be definitely more messengers, more voices of the hero's journey, and this message of positive change and transformation, and taking these steps and putting yourself on the path, and understanding the doubt and all the voices of the ego are just a part of the journey, and it's okay. We all go through this,
and we are here for you.
And we are
here as mentors.
And we'd invite people, certainly to either write us at wholesoulschool@gmail.com if you have a good adventure. If you say, oh, I've crossed a threshold, right? If you have a positive or empowering story that you want to share, you can always email it to us, and maybe that'll become a part of future podcasts where we'll read some people's stories.
Right.
We also invite people to put it in the comments section and say free to share, right? I suppose if it's in the comments section, it's out there on the World Wide Web. It can be shared. So these are things. And then also, I want to invite people, certainly if you're inspired by these podcasts and our growing mission and vision here, to make a donation to Whole Soul School and Foundation at our website, wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org. We have a couple of t-shirts in a bonfire store. I'll leave the link for that below the description of this podcast or this video. And I just want to invite people to hold the vision. We're all in it together. We're all collectively in the hero's journey now. So there's no one that is left out of this journey that we're on. We have left the precipice of the old life, pre-2020, this pandemic, and we are all invited to the question of how do you want to participate in the newness that is finding all of us.
Beautiful.
Right? So I want to thank everybody for joining me, and we will see you again next month for our Fireside Chats podcast. And stay tuned and keep a lookout on our website and on our YouTube channel and social media for other podcasts, because I have Jonathan William just podcasted with me about his book, Pyramid of Presence. I have Paul Panzica joining me to talk about the archetypal energy of the hero's journey. Fascinating conversation. I haven't even had it yet, but I'm so excited about the adventure. Whenever I connect with Paul, it is always an adventure, right? And
Joanna and Lee.
Right. We have some other voices that I'm not going to mention yet, but they're coming into the conversation. So there's more energy coming.
Yeah.
And when people put in their time and energy and resources and they donate what they have to give, whether it's their stories, their comments, their appreciation, financial gifting, buying some of our apparel, seeing some of our gifts in our shop,
Right.
there's a lot of ways to participate and come together as a community
Yes.
that's on the hero's journey.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Blessings.